That's pressure.
Your predecessor.
No worries.
Ah.
Good to see everyone. I'm starting to see some people's faces and hear your voices. I hope everyone's doing okay and everyone's staying safe and that everyone had a good New Year's.
Hi, Rabbi.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi, Rabbi. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Evening.
Hey, Rabbi.
Good evening, Arab Toe. Hey, what's up, Wayne?
Hey, how are you?
Good to see y'all. Have people started getting their vaccines?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
I got the Moderna on the 30th of December. Other than injection site soreness, no issue.
Awesome. Awesome news.
And so next one's on the 27th, Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we'll see. I hear the second one is a little bit more of a pop than the first one.
Oh, you're going to be a doctor?
I've heard with some people it can be.
Yeah.
Well, I hope not for you. I know, I'm sure with a lot of people it's not, so I hope not.
Thank you.
But I'm glad, bigger, more people, the better, and get this thing
Absolutely.
open. Get people back into the synagogue and all of us to our wherever we want to go and get our lives back together. Well, it's good.
How's your family?
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Rabbi.
Okay. So why don't we get started? Just a note, our next program is a month from now. It is February 10th, and we're going to have historian Josh Furman, who is, if you've heard Josh speak before, you know how terrific he is. He's done wonders for our Jewish community, set up the Houston Jewish Archives, and at the Rice University. He's an incredible professor and academic, and just a real mensch, a brilliant man, and I think you guys really enjoy what he has to say. Tonight, we are blessed to have my friend, and I would say really the leader of our community, the leader of our Jewish community, and that's Kari Saratovsky. And Kari is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston. She spent her career in both government and philanthropic sector building strategic alliances, directing programs, and facilitating national efforts that advance social change both within and beyond the Jewish community. Kari has done wonders for our Jewish community in just, I think it's been about 1.5 to 2 years. Kari, you can correct me if I'm wrong, since you've been. How long has it been?
15 months.
15 months. And you've already been doing great things. Kari is a member of our synagogue, a proud member of Beth Yeshurun, and you guys may know her husband, who is Elias Saratovsky, who's our regional director of APAC. In addition, she's blessed with 3 beautiful children. So Kari, without further ado, welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Rabbi.
And so tonight we thought we'd do something a little bit different. And I am going to interview Kari, if you will, and ask her some questions. And we'll go from there. And then I'll give a chance for all of you guys to ask your questions as well. So Kari, tell us a little bit more about your background. I just touched upon it for just a moment. A little bit about your background and what led you to become the CEO of our federation.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank you all for taking some time this evening. It really is a privilege for me to be able to join you. And when Rabbi Strauss and I first started talking about this, it was probably 6 months ago, and they were just starting to put their schedule together for 100 Jewish men, and we said, surely we'll be together. And we're of course not, but I'm so glad that this medium allows us to at least feel like, it's actually more intimate because we can be in one another's homes, and hopefully my children stay on that side of the door, but if not, that's how things go. So I'll share a little bit about my journey here. It actually starts, I'll rewind a I'm the product of two Jewish communal professionals. My mother was the city director for BBYO in Indianapolis, where I grew up. My father was the executive director of AE fraternity for 30 some years. His mission, his purpose in life was to maintain AE as a Jewish fraternity. And I grew up kind of in, really very deeply connected to Jewish values and community. I did not choose, a Jewish communal professional path when I started my career. So I started my career in DC exactly 20 years ago, and started working on Capitol Hill. I was a political science, public policy major. I knew that DC was the place that that I was meant to be, and I spent some time, working on Capitol Hill, and then September 11th happened, and had a very unique opportunity at the time to move over to work on the President's Call to Service initiative at the White House. And that was an effort to really bring more attention to service and volunteering, and scale programs like Peace Corps and AmeriCorps, and programs that brought people together to, to engage in their community and connect in deep ways through service. And we grew both the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps to the largest levels to date. And it was a time in our country where people wanted to give back, they wanted to volunteer, they wanted to connect in meaningful ways to their community. So I spent about 5-6 years in the administration and working on various service initiatives. And then, just my quick path, I then ended up in family philanthropy for a while. For another probably 6 years or so, I started working for the Case Foundation. So Steve Case was the founder of America Online. And Steve and his wife, Jean, were looking at their philanthropic efforts and trying to figure out how, coming out of AOL, they saw social media as a way to democratize philanthropy, right? That philanthropy shouldn't just be a bunch of rich people writing really large checks, but rather, how do we use these new tools to think differently and to connect people? When Steve started AOL, he saw it as a civic engagement platform, really. It was about bringing people together around things that they cared about. So now when you have the introduction of Web 2.0 at the time, and Facebook was just coming on the scene, Twitter was just kind of, in its very early stages. And we started looking at these tools and saying, how can we use them for social good? And what are the ways that we can bring people together to, to connect to community? So you see this thread of community and connection and engagement kind of throughout my career. So not only were my parents Jewish communal professionals, I then ended up meeting a guy in DC who also was a Jewish communal professional. So as you heard, Elias, my husband, who is with APAC, his job took us to San Francisco, where he was a political director for about 4 years in San Francisco for the Pacific Northwest. And at that time, I still continued to work for the Cases, and it was a great time to be in the Bay Area at that time as these new Web 2.0 tools were being birthed, and everybody was trying to figure out, well, what is our social impact strategy, and what are the opportunities that we have, not just to make a profit off of these platforms, but also to do good. And we can get into all kinds of conversations about what that means today, which is probably not the purpose of this evening. But it was a fascinating time to be in that space. So clearly, I haven't talked about anything Jewish yet. Well, yet this theme of tikkun olam and giving back was just inherent. It's been part of me and kind of part of the journey. And I started to do some work outside of my professional role with an organization that was just getting its start called Repair the World. And Repair is a national service organization. It's now been around for about a decade, which really aims to make service a defining part of Jewish life. So suddenly this world of service and volunteerism and my role started to merge. And so I spent a lot of time kind of helping in the early stages of repair and growing that to kind of a national Jewish movement. Again, we get the call, Elias, we'd like you down in the Southwest to be the regional director. And I said, well, that's something, we had really never spent time in Texas. And I, remember being on the other side of the phone and saying, Elias, Mazel Tov, that's so wonderful. Where's the Southwest region located? Where will we be? And he said, Houston, Texas. I said, he grew up in Brooklyn. I said, have you ever been to Texas? I remember this conversation so vividly. That was exactly 10 years ago. It was January of 11. Our daughter was 6 months old. And by March of 2011, we were on the ground here in Houston. And I couldn't imagine a better place to raise a family and to connect to community and to take all of these things that we had learned on both coasts and then suddenly be in this community that is so warm and welcoming and open, and to start, a different kind of Jewish journey with our family. And that's what we've done for the last 10 years. We now have added a couple to the mix. So we also have 6-year-old twins. And I will say that over the course of the first 5-6 years that I was here in town, most of my work, I started doing consulting for some national organizations. I had left the Case Foundation. I was doing my own thing. But I started getting very deeply involved on the board of Beth Yeshurun, on the board of the Federation, and different, the community was drawing me in, and I started to really connect. And what brought me here to this role at the Federation was really the experience I had after Harvey. And everybody in Houston has a Harvey story. And for me, I was so blessed in the sense that my family was not directly impacted. And immediately my instincts turned to, what can we do? How do we show up for our community in this moment in time? And at the time I was on the board of the Federation, I will never forget getting the call from Sandy Weiner, who was the board chair at that time. And he said, Kari, what would you think about rolling off the board so we can hire you to really run point on the work that we're doing around Harvey? And so from that point, it felt, Hineni, here I am. This is the moment to figure out how to heal and help the community. And so we ran a $22 million campaign. We created a brand new allocation structure to really identify what are the problems that we can solve in this community, and how are we going to be there first and foremost for people, for individuals. How are we going to sustain Jewish life and ensure the continuity of Jewish life, even though our community feels so broken? And then how are we going to sustain our institutions, and what is the support that is needed? And so so I spent about 18 months as a consultant embedded at the Federation doing this work, and it changed my relationship with the community. It changed and deepened my relationship with the team at the Federation, with our major donors, with our institutions. And so fast forward, when there was a CEO change and I got another call of a different sort, it again felt like there was unfinished business, that, here we were as a community kind of at a moment that was so painful and hard. And we had just started to rebuild, bringing lives, back, kind of rebuilding lives, rebuilding our institutions. But there was a question in my mind about what does it take to build a thriving 21st century Jewish community? And when you are knocked off your feet in that way, all you can see is opportunity, and all you can see is what's next, and how do we reimagine the role and the relevance of the Federation at this moment in time. And I joked, Lee is sitting right there kind of over my shoulder and on my screen right now. Lee Wunsch, who served our community with such such passion and commitment for many years, and I owe so much to Lee. Not only that that this community is the way it is, but that Lee has embraced and welcomed change, and has kind of said, I want to get out of the way and let you guys figure it out. But to build on something that is already so solid is something that is a gift and a joy, and brings such kind of fulfillment to me. So that was a lot more long-winded than I hoped to be, but I think it's important to just kind of connect. The Jewish journey of mine was a thread throughout, but it wasn't until the last few years that I took a lot of those experiences that I have had and kind of, am starting to reimagine, well, what does the Jewish communal professional field look like and need in order to change and be relevant for the future?
Well, it sounds like it was Beshert, that it was destined that you would become our CEO. And, it's also a reminder too, that sometimes some good things come out of some really rough experiences, as we all experienced through Harvey. And I think all of us, no matter our role in the community, will have learned a lot through this experience that we're going through right now, and our lives are going to be forever changed. Kari, let me ask you a little bit more, because I'm a big believer in the Federation, and I know many people on this call are, but there are some people that don't even know what the Federation is,
right?
And don't understand how it works. And with a very different state of Israel today than it was in the past, what the relevance of the Federation is today. Talk a little bit more about the Federation and how does it work, and what's your role specifically with the Federation?
So I'm happy to do that. I mean, this is a question, despite the fact that the Federation inherently touches more lives throughout the Houston Jewish community probably than any other organization, it remains one of the biggest mysteries. And I'm not always sure why that is, but I think that we have a responsibility to kind of shift the way that people think about Federation. So historically, I think that Federation has been seen as the fundraising vehicle for the Jewish community. I don't see that changing. I think that there continues to be a role and the place for the Jewish Federation to help support our institutions, our day schools, our synagogues, our early childhood programs, our social service agencies. And I think that there's also this opportunity to reimagine the role and relevance of Federation in terms of providing, what I've been calling kind of that B2B network support. So what I mean by that is, like, for those of you who come from the business world, the business to business, meaning Federation to synagogue, Federation to day schools, Federation, what is the role that we can play that only the Federation can play as a neutral convener of people and ideas, and be an incubator of ideas. So what sometimes goes unknown to many is that the Federation is playing a role in convening all of our heads of school, convening, on a regular basis, convening, the heads of our synagogues, and creating a neutral space for our institutions to understand kind of what are some of the trends, what are we seeing across the community, how does this relate to, my institution, and then how are we driving deeper engagement? So there in 2016, Houston underwent a demographic study. And what we saw was there are somewhere 50, let's call it 55,000 Jews throughout the greater Houston area. Well, what we knew about those Jews and what we started to see was that only about 30% were engaged in Jewish life, meaning they belong to a synagogue, they belong to a JCC, they send their kids to a day school or to a Jewish camp, something that they donated to the Federation, something that connected them. And the reality is that we engage that 30% over and over and over. So that's like the high highly engaged, connected group of individuals. Well, what would it take for us to grow from 30% engagement to 50% engagement over the course of the next 3-5 years? What does that look like? Well, we're only strong, strong as our Jewish institutions. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do we provide the kind of institutional support and leadership and resources and tools and dollars to ensure that our institutions and the leadership of our institutions have what they need in order to attract and retain and to grow that that pool of individuals who are engaged, because that's how we're, it's not federation in a B2C model, meaning business to end consumer or community member. It's in that B2B, like that's where we can have the greatest impact. And so how do we kind of reimagine that role and relevance? One of, I want to just share one, one very specific example. During Harvey, what I recognized was that the absence of a CRC, so we used to have a community relations council that was sunset for a variety of reasons, probably, 6-7 years ago. But the absence of a CRC during a crisis moment meant that the Jewish community did not have a seat at the table where a lot of decisions were being made at the city, at the local, at the county, at the state level during a crisis. And so one of my very first hires, when I started in September of 2019, was to bring on a director of government affairs. I said, I knew for political reasons we weren't going to be able to reestablish a CRC at this moment, but I knew that we needed some kind of role. Well, Jackie Fisherman, I hired Jackie Fisherman to kind of serve in this role. And she quickly started to establish some different relationships at critical levels of our state and local government, but also being the community player. If the Jewish community needs to think beyond just how we support ourselves, but really what is the connection to the broader community. We are one of the most diverse communities, cities in the country. So how the Jewish community shows up, not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors is critically important. And so the work that we have been doing through our government affairs, through JRAN, which was we established something called JRAN, which is the Jewish Response and Action Network, which the initial mandate was to focus on emergency response. And quickly, pandemic was never a part of the initial mandate of what we thought JRAN would be doing when we established it back in December of 19. But quickly in March of 20, we made the quick pivot and we said, JRAN, here are the ways in which the Federation can pool resources and experts and tools so that our community has access to things so that they can make the decisions that are in the best interest of their institutions. And so that, to me, those were all kind of things that were really critical. And so I think, to get back to the role and relevance of federation in today's world goes much further than just the dollars. But it's in how are we convening, how are we being that partner, and then how are we ensuring that the Jewish community is showing up, across our greater Houston area.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think JRAN has been a great addition to our community because I will tell you, as a rabbi, it gives me an opportunity to hear from the experts and to share that information with my members. Tell us a little bit more, Kari, specifically about what's happening now. Like, what is the Federation doing now to help our community weather this COVID storm, if you will?
Yeah. So very quickly, I think the establishment of JRAN, which we can talk about later, that was kind of the first response. It was what is the role that we need to be playing to just ensure that people have access to information, that there was so much misinformation at the beginning. There's been so much misinformation around vaccines now. There was so much and how can we ensure that it becomes a one-stop shop for our institutions to go to have experts, provide, provide their expertise around various issues that are relevant, whether that was shutting down organizations, reopening organizations, distribution of vaccines. And we've created a series. We've done 10 different conversation starters around a whole variety of topics, a number of different kinds of convenings, a regular newsletter or email just to let people know kind of here's what you should be paying attention to. So that was kind of our first response. We also recognize that in the same way, I started to put my Harvey recovery hat on very quickly after, as soon as we realized that the pandemic was kind of taking on a life of its own. And we quickly had to decide how are we going to respond as a community? And so that meant on top of our annual campaign, actually launching a second line appeal, which was led by Gary and Tracy Stein. And we, to date, we've raised almost $3.5 million for COVID relief. And it also forced us to think about what are the most critical ways that we can allocate those dollars to help those that are in need. And so we kind of went back to what we had looked at and the framework we used after Harvey, which was individuals first. We knew that we wanted to make sure that we were taking care of the individuals in our community, and whether that was financial assistance, access to mental health services, employment services, all of the things, the wraparound services that JFS provides, we wanted to ensure that JFS could hit the ground running and not have to worry about raising the dollars. And one of the most beautiful things about our community, and I will tell you this is unique because I talk to my colleagues and Linda Berger speaks with her colleagues, and nobody can believe the relationship that JFS and the Federation and the JCC have on the ground here. And that is a testament to years and decades of connection among the leadership of those institutions. But JFS turned to us and said, we don't want to be in the fundraising business right now. We want to be in the service delivery business. And we said, we're equipped to do the fundraising. And we partnered. And so first and foremost, ensuring that people came first, and it was a people first mindset. Second was continuity of Jewish life, ensuring that our institutions who were making very difficult decisions about a whole host of things, who were seeing decline in revenue, decline in program revenue, decline in membership, so how is it that we can assist our institutions and ensure the continuity of Jewish life when connection is more important than ever? And so our board approved $1.6 million to JFS to provide support to them that actually gives them a runway through the end of this calendar year. And then we also provided support of almost $1 million to 80 institutions. It was an unprecedented investment that our board decided to make. Historically, the Federation has not provided funding directly to synagogues. We have not provided, outside of Harvey, really, this was the first time that the Federation was supporting individual synagogues, that we supported early childhood programs. So there was a different kind of model and approach that we used, but we recognized that institutions were in need, and some were really in crisis mode. And so what were the ways that we could craft a distribution of those dollars in a efficient and effective way? And so so that's so between JRAN and the dollars, and I think also support around PPP and ensuring that our institutions knew how to navigate and access dollars from the federal government. That was another thing that was critically important, and a service that we provided both at the local level and JFNA provided. So,
well, I will say I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Federation was extremely supportive of our congregation and gave us a substantial amount after Hurricane Harvey to help us rebuild, and then just recently made a nice financial contribution to our day school, our religious school, and to the synagogue that can really help us weather these difficult times. And just as important, you're right, it's an information clearinghouse. And it's also knowing that we have representation, whether it's in communal or governmental affairs, knowing that the Jewish community is well represented.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about Israel, Kari. You know, Israel, you know, when you probably started in your field, when it was, whether you were in DC or when you were in college, certainly when I was in college, Israel was a lot more dependent on the American Jewish community. And that's changed a lot. In fact, we in Houston know that better than anyone. You remember, Kari, after Harvey, and I know Lee knows that, and some of you know that after Harvey, the state of Israel made a $1 million contribution to the Houston Jewish community to help us all rebuild, which was unprecedented in the history of the diaspora-Israel relationship. So what does Federation Now do for Israel? And how's that relationship today?
Sure. So, you know, the connection and the relationship that federations and the JFNA system has with Israel has changed and evolved over decades. And I think there's always been, or I would say maybe recently been, kind of this struggle of, is federation showing up and supporting the local community, or is it showing up and supporting, you know, initiatives in Israel and overseas? And I think that we've kind of struck you know, somewhat of a balance of that. About 30% of the dollars that we raise in our annual campaign go to support Israel, and primarily the vehicles that are supporting Israel right now are Jaffe and JDC. And the Houston community has had a very long-standing, and many of you have either been there or know about this, but a long-standing relationship with Yosef Taldado, which is a neighborhood in Petah Tikva in Israel. And I think that and there's, you know, conversations about what is the evolution of the connection between our Houston Jewish community and Israel, and where the Federation is kind of seeing its role right now is in connecting in a like people to people way, in a human way, and ensuring that that we're helping expose the next generation to Israel, to the promise of Israel, and to, you know, to Israel in a way that is different. You know, I let my husband take care of the politics side, and you know, but really where we're focused is more on how do we ensure a strong relationship between Israel and or I'm sorry, the Federation and our support for Israel. And you know, whether that's in supporting programs like our Israel Teen Ambassadors, and ensuring that before our teens get to campus, that they have a strong and proud connection to, you know, to Israel, and have the confidence to talk about Israel in a way that that makes them proud and confident when they get to college campuses. It's in programs like, you know, our investment in Kahila High, which, you know, has definitely, you know, a thread of Israel engagement and connection to Israel, and God willing, you know, the first trip to Israel, that, you know, with our teens. And so I think there's some, you know, some really important opportunities. But we do, I mean, we have an Israel and Overseas Committee that meets, that deliberates around where we can have the, you know, the greatest investment of dollars. And then it's also, where can we locally ensure that we're exposing people to all facets of Israel. And so that's kind of where we are.
And that relationship will continue to evolve, and Federation is a big part of that.
Yes.
So I have one more question for you, Kari, and then I'm going to invite people, if you have questions, if you want to go to the chat room in our Zoom app and just type in the questions that you may want to ask Kari Saratovsky. So Kari, one question I always ask leaders of our Jewish community is, what can we as Beth Yeshurun members do to help the Federation?
I think, you know, walking away from this evening, I hope that I gave you a little bit more of a lens into the practical work of Federation. And I think that oftentimes, again, you know, we think about it as this fundraising machine, but for what? And what is the impact? And I think that the role and relevance of a federation as it continues to evolve, what we need is we need more ambassadors to understand and to connect and to feel connected to the work of federation. I think because we are not on the front lines of the service delivery, it's easier for us to kind of remain that mystery. And instead, what we're trying to really help show is that beyond the dollars, beyond the funding that we provide for the community, it's ensuring that our Jewish communal professionals across the board have access to professional development, that they have access to one another, that they have, and continuing to provide for, different, to show how we're helping sustain the Jewish community. I want to extend an invitation, and I'll put it in the chat, but on January 31st, we are doing a big initiative with 3 other communities. It's called One Night. And that's another opportunity for us to expose a whole new group of people to the Federation. And so we've got some great entertainment. Sebastian Maniscalco, who's a comedian, is going to be performing. We're going to do a very short 15-minute, showcase of Federation here in Houston and our impact both here in Houston and globally. And then the rest of the program will be to kind of entertain. But I would just invite you to join us and to experience that because I think it's going to be a really neat way for us to show up for the community right now as well. So I'll put that in the chat.
That's good to know. And it's kind of recreating what we can do right now virtually.
Yes.
And it's all we can do. I know you join me, Kari, and I think everyone on this in our meeting tonight is how nice it's going to be once we're able to be together and hug, shake hands, just to be in one large room together. God willing, soon. By the way, are you having people reach out to the Federation asking where they can get a vaccine? Are you hearing from?
Yes, that has been something. And we did a JRAN session last week with Councilmember Abby Kamen and Dr. Ed Septimus and somebody from the health department to really share. Here's the thing, because I think there is so much misinformation out there right now. But here's where you can find that. Here's how Houston is receiving vaccinations and what the process is. And so it was a very helpful session. It was taped, and I think you can find it on our website. But yes, we are fielding questions. JFS is fielding questions, and we're trying to provide real-time, relevant information to ensure that people have access.
Good. It's so vital right now, especially for our elderly community, of knowing where to go and how to get it done and why they need to do it.
Yeah.
So one question here, Bill's, and by the way, the information about the January 31st event, Jennifer Rosenzweig already posted, and I look forward to participating in that event, and I hope a lot of us will have a chance to participate. Kari, your first question is from Bill. To help us understand a little bit more of the insides of the Federation, what is the approximate number of staff employed at the Federation?
Yeah, that's so. Hi, Bill. It's good to. I don't see you, but you're probably there somewhere. So we have about 27 full-time employees, FTEs at the Federation, and then another 6 at the foundation. So we are co-housed with the Houston Jewish Community Foundation and the Federation, and we have an annual campaign that's somewhere between. It's been historically somewhere between 8 and 8.5 million for a very, very long time. But the totality of what we raise in terms of dollars, if you look at last year between our annual campaign and the COVID appeal and our building fund, as many of you know, and I can actually share a little bit more in terms of the redevelopment of the campus. But we raised $18 million from the community in the past year. And I think sometimes we don't talk about the totality of the dollars. We talk about our annual campaign, which is one piece of that. But that's a pretty significant, investment that we are making back into the community. So
$18 million, that's incredible. Per capita, that's got to be definitely up there in terms of federations in the United States. David Bell is asking, Kari, this is another good question. What would be at the top of your wish list for a totally new strategic initiative for Federation over the next 5 years?
David, thank you. And I'm so glad that you're with us as well. So this is something that I think we're grappling with a bit as a board, as the leadership of the organization right now, which is to really think about what is that strategic direction that we're moving in, and I think in a lot of ways what we want to ensure is that, again, I spoke about this earlier, but how do we reach beyond that 30% that we're engaging over and over and over? And what does that have to look like in order for more people to feel connected? I'm not talking about to Federation, I'm talking about to Jewish community, because I actually think that we do a disservice, and I don't know that everybody would agree with this, but the strength of our federation is our federation is only strong if our community is strong, right? And so what I'm trying to think about is we're only strong if we continue to grow and expand the way in which we're reaching and engaging more Jews who don't identify with organized Jewish community. And many of our institutions are starting to do, I think, a good job at doing some of that outreach. And I think that the more that we can think about some ways that are low barrier ways to engage more people, the better. So I think there's some huge opportunities just in terms of engagement. I also think there's some really interesting opportunities in terms of ensuring that the Jewish community has a role and responsibility in the security of the broader Jewish community, and not just in terms of security, after a natural disaster, but ensuring that that we have a safe and secure community. And most cities our size, most Jewish communities our size, and even many that are, all that are larger and many that are smaller, have a security director, a Jewish community security director that works with all of the institutions. I think that Houston does not currently have that. We're one of the only large intermediate federations that does not have a security director on board. And we receive a lot of support from SCAN, which is the Secure Communities Network. And there are different ways that we've established relationships with local law enforcement, but having that person, retired local law enforcement, helping do community assessments for security, helping ensure that we have a direct line to HPD and to Homeland, local Homeland Security. That's a really important role, and so that is something that I think also that we need to explore in a different kind of way. And again, but for Federation, the question becomes, but for Federation, who else is providing that kind of a service? And so those are the questions that I'm starting to ask, which is, we don't want to be duplicative. We don't want to. There are some great institutions across the board, within our Jewish community that are doing incredible things. I don't want to duplicate that, but I want to try to identify where are those areas where we're not serving the community, and how can the Federation show up in a way that's a little bit different.
That makes a lot of sense. Kari, another question from Richard Newman. Does Federation have programs to form alliances with other religious communities?
So we do that in an informal way. We have not really done that in a formal way. And again, I think to get back to the point of not duplicating efforts, I think AJC is doing a terrific job, in a lot of respects, establishing those relationships. We do one-off events. We've been doing some events with the Muslim community. We've been doing some events with Catholic Charities. We've been doing, so there have been there's been some work that we have done, but it hasn't been in, in a formal way. In addition to the, I'd mentioned we hired a director of government affairs. We also hired a director of social action. And so Sasha Bodner, it fills that role. And Sasha's role is to spend more time thinking about where, how can we enhance opportunities for the Jewish community to connect beyond, and with other partners across the community. And then what are the ways that, many of our synagogues and day schools and others are starting their own social action programs. And I really commend Rabbi Strauss and Beth Yeshurun on all of the social action work that has evolved kind of over the last couple of years. It's been tremendous, and we're starting to see that. And so again, we're trying to identify what is a unique role that the Federation can play to lift up and support all of those different efforts that are happening across the community, to ensure that those who want to give back and to volunteer and to connect more broadly with the community have opportunities to do so.
All right, Kari, thank you. Another question, and I want to say something about this when you're done, but how does the Federation identify unaffiliated Jews, and how do you contact and get them involved in the community?
If I'm being completely transparent, which is kind of the only way that I know how to be, we don't do a good job of it. And that's why we continue to engage the people we can reach in that 30%. And part of, when we talk about, it was David that asked the question around new strategic initiatives. We have got to be using data in a different kind of way. And I think federations historically have, think about data in terms of donor data. And what I'm trying to help the team think about is data in terms of impact data and in terms of understanding our community in a way that that we don't yet. And so I think the demographic study, which is now a few years old, was the first step in that, but a demographic study is a snapshot in a moment of time. And we need to create a mechanism to be able to identify those who are not affiliated, who are not connected, and get them engaged. I'll share one program that I do think is doing a good job of this. So many of you are probably familiar with our PJ Library program. PJ Library sends books every month to young families, and through a generous contribution from the Grinspoon Foundation, they launched something called PJ Connectors. And so we now have a person that is in, let's see, we have one in Sugar Land, we have one in the Woodlands, and we have one in, I think, Katy, and each of whom are connecting with young families in those areas, and young Jewish families in those areas. And I think that's another thing where oftentimes when we think about the Jewish community, you think about the shtetl and the Braze, in the Meyerland area, and we're not always thinking beyond. And yet we're seeing a lot of growth in communities north of us and west of us. And what is the role that Federation can play in helping ensure that we are connecting with Jews so that they do feel not as though they have to always come in to to the kind of the Meyerland Bel Air area, but that we are also bringing programming to them, and that they feel connected, and that they have kind of hubs of engagement out there. And so so I would say, while we haven't figured it out at a large scale, we're starting to to experiment a bit more and find those opportunities.
Well, Kari, you said so many important things tonight, but I think you said something in particular that really resonated with me that I didn't realize. You said when only 30% of the Houston Jewish community is affiliated, involved. I always assumed it was higher than that. And I love what you said. Imagine what our community would look like if we could just get from 30 to 50%. And I think about Beth Yeshurun. If we could get 10, 20% more involvement, where more involvement from Jews, less Jews who are just once a year Jews and more Jews that are members that are here all the time. And same, your challenge is the same. How do you get more Jews involved? Think about all the great things we already do and imagine if we got just that percentage of people to get more involved. It's a great goal to have. And I will say, knowing you and knowing you for so many years now, there's a good chance we will with you in charge. So Kari, thank you. I know how busy you are being a mother of 3 and how busy
Can you just say for
you
a
are.
little bit longer till bedtime is over?
Make Elias do it. I'm sure at least he's not traveling as much and you're not traveling as much. So I know we're all getting a little bit more time at home for good or bad. But I know in the big picture, there are some things we'll miss about the pandemic, but obviously we want this over soon and all of us safe and healthy. And I want to thank everyone for participating in tonight's program. And Kari, thank you again. And we're always here to help at Beth Yeshurun. You know that, and continued strength in all you do and blessings and all the best.
Thank you.
And everyone, I hope you'll join us again February 10th with historian Josh Furman, Dr. Josh Furman, I should say. And be safe, everyone. I hope to see all of you soon. Have a good night.
Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kari. Thanks, everyone.
Night.